Author is funded by the Pacific Northwest Writers Association, supporting writers from pen to publication since 1955. To learn more about the PNWA and their yearly conference, please go to pnwa.org. Hi, this is Bill Kenower of Author Magazine, and I'm here at Third Place Books in Lake Forest Park with Maureen McQuerry, author of The Peculiars. Maureen, welcome to Author.
Thanks so much for having me.
So Maureen, The Peculiars is your first published novel, but not the beginning of your writing career. You started as a poet and teacher, is that right?
That's right. I've taught for years, and I've taught middle school all the way through college. And during that time, I wrote and published 2 nonfiction books. And then I was writing for literary magazines and publishing poetry, and I have a chapbook out. So that's really how I started writing.
So now you're teaching Composition 101, and 90% of your students are not writers per se. How do you talk to them about this thing that you love and know so well to be of use to them?
Well, I think what makes the difference is the teacher's passion for the subject. And I'm passionate about writing. So I start every day with a poem. You know, in English 101, you don't usually read poetry. You're doing expository essays. You're trying to get the basic mechanics of writing down. But I think that poetry teaches not just the love of language and enthusiasm for it, it teaches some critical thinking too. So hopefully they might not come out most of them are not going to come out wanting to be fiction writers, but they're going to have some enthusiasm and some idea that there's a whole world out there that involves writing and books that they might want to be a part of in some way.
I'm sure that when you were writing The Peculiars, you had your discipline for finishing a manuscript-length project, as when you wrote your nonfiction. What was your discipline for doing when you were doing your poetry work? Was there a ritual? Was there a time that you wrote, or?
Poetry, yeah. I did poetry while I was working full time. I was raising kids. I had a very busy schedule, and it was easy to fit poetry into small spaces in my life. Easier than it was for a fiction manuscript, because the fiction manuscript is a longer journey. And you're taking characters on this long journey. So with poetry, I really did fit it into the odd spaces in my life. And I didn't have a specific time every day. Whereas when I've moved to fiction, I found that I really have to have a dedicated time and place.
Because you forget how to enter the stream of the story, don't you?
Yes.
You have to, but if you do it every day or 5 days a week, then you're kind of, even when you leave, you're still in it, aren't you? A little bit.
Always thinking about it, yeah. It's always in the background. And poetry I tried to write, and I did write on a regular basis, most days. It's just that I didn't always have the same time of day to do it, or the same place to do it even.
But you could finish something.
I could finish something.
And it's important.
Yes, that's so satisfying to feel that you're finishing something. You know, and writing a novel is such a long process, and the finish line is so far out there, and a lot of times you can see just as far as the car's headlights in front of you. And so that could be frustrating,
All right, I'm going to guess now. I usually can get it accurate, but I'm going to say you are a minimal outliner, if at all.
I want to know what your clues are, why you say that.
I just try to read you energetically. Poets, first of all, I would say tend not to be outliners, but I'd say you maybe have a little bit.
I do have a little bit. Okay, that's, and that's always the big question, do you outline or not? So I usually start with a character and with some questions that I seem to be wrestling with in my own life, or at least thinking about, and those and the character somehow meld. So for Peculiars, the first thing that came to mind was this character, Lena, and she was sitting on a steam train, headed off on a journey, and she had these hands that had an extra joint on each finger. And I knew it was her story. And because it was a steam train, it gave me that feel that the Victorian time period would work really well. So that's kind of how it started, but I was also thinking about some questions in my own life, and one of them was, do we become who our parents are? Especially if you don't always have the most positive image of your parents. That was one of the questions that Lena is her father left when he was 5, and so she is struggling with that, and he has a bad reputation. And so she was thinking about that. And then the whole question about how we treat people who are different in our society, people who might look a little different than we are in some way. Do those differences on the outside mean that there are some differences on the inside as well? And in 1888, they didn't know much about DNA, and that whole nature versus nurture question was rattling around like it still is. So I start with, that's kind of how I start. And then I know the character arc. I have a good idea of how my character
What do you
needs.
mean you know the character arc? Do you know, does it arrive to you very quickly? Do you feel it right away, or do you have to go searching it out a lot?
The character arrives pretty quickly. The questions come pretty quickly. And then I think about where my character needs to be by the end of the journey, how that character is going to change.
Right.
Now, I don't know the event at the end of the book.
But you know where you want them to be emotionally.
Yes, that's right. Well, and that's what I say when I mean character arc.
Yeah.
So I don't know the event that's going to change that, but I know where I want her to be emotionally. And then I start to know some of the other characters. So I would say I know journey points along the way,
Right.
but there's this whole wilderness that I kind of wander around in, or that gets revealed to me as I'm writing. And I think I know my characters pretty well, but there are always things about my characters I discover as I'm writing as well.
So what did you learn writing The Peculiars that you're going to take to your next project?
I learned something that that a reader will follow a character's voice anywhere if they get really engaged in that voice, and that the voice is the driving thing that's going to keep them turning the page. And I also have been having some discussions with a writing friend, about conflict and tension and the difference between the two, and how to create that emotion of tension in the reader that keeps them turning the pages based on the conflict in the story. So, but I think my biggest lesson has been about voice. And developing that, and how important that is, especially in young adult fiction.
All right, I'd like you to finish the sentence for me. If writing has taught me anything,
Oh my gosh.
it has taught me what?
Okay, if writing has taught me anything, it has taught me how important hope is. Even a slice of hope in the bleakest story resonates with readers. And I really see that. And I think that's one of the reasons that YA has crossed over to the adult market. Because in even the bleakest YA stories, in the dystopian epics that are out there right now, there's always a slice of hope in there.
Yes.
And I think that matters.